Hi, shalom everyone, and thank you for joining us for another episode of Crossing Boundaries. My name is Kim. I'm streaming live to you from Tel Aviv, Israel today, and together with me is one of our amazing co-founders, Aziz Abusera, who is trying to log us into Facebook right now. And today we're talking about making peace a movement again, and bringing along the majority of the people and not the minority. So it's part of our bigger series about diversity and minorities in the Middle East. So welcome, Avi and Huda. Thank you for joining us today. Happy to have you both. Maybe we can start with you, Avi, telling us about ALMEP, giving some background to our listeners.
Sure. Well, first of all, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me and for having us and ALMEP. ALMEP is a coalition, a community, a network of over 100 organizations that are all working to build bridges between Israelis and Palestinians, Arabs and Jews in the Middle East. We started, gosh, it's 16 years ago, and with just a couple dozen organizations, and now we're over 100. And they're working every day on the ground to do things that most people would not believe. In every sector of life, getting into people's daily lives, but helping them work together, because there's something that we learned through 2-3 decades of trying to have a peace process that got to the end stage, is that we always got to the end and we were hitting this gap of trust. All people know about each other, for the most part, most Israelis, most Palestinians, is this cartoon on TV, and it's a picture of the worst possible actors, the most extreme actors. Those are the people you want to get on TV, throw a bomb, shoot somebody. Those are the people that are most visible, and people don't have those real relationships to fall back on and say, hey, I actually know some Israelis, I know some Palestinians, and they're not like that. And we do have a partner for peace. And that's the gap that ALMEP and its 100+ members are working every day to plug, with tens of thousands of people. Actually, at its peak, we had 200,000 people in an online event this year of Israelis and Palestinians working to build those bridges, so that not just this year or next year, but over 5, 10, 15, 20 years, we're creating generational change so that Israelis and Palestinians will have those relationships, so that it can actually reach a peace agreement and then have it stick. And that's what we're working on. And so we do that as a network through many different activities. We do a lot of work in Washington and Europe and around the world to build support for these programs from governments around the world. That includes over $120 million we've brought from the US government to support these projects, and an effort to create an international fund that starts to count the investment in billions with a B, not millions, so we can really scale up all of this work, so that we're connecting to the masses of Israelis and Palestinians and really laying that groundwork, inspired by something that worked in Northern Ireland. And then in the region, we're connecting all these programs and we're building their capacities, and that's what Huda does, and I'll let her talk about that. And she's really our leader in the field to represent these groups and help them do so much more with the resources that we can bring to bear.
Yeah, and we'll come to Huda in a minute, but I want to have one more question for you, Avi. I remember in 2000, I think it was 2009, 8 or 9, first time I came to an event set up by ALMEP, and it was just the beginning, I believe, of the organization. It was snowing. I just had come to the States, and I thought the event will be canceled, and I was told apparently you do have to still go to events when it snows in the States. So I got in the car and drove terrified, trying to make it to Washington, D.C. from Virginia. But one thing I remember back then, the focus is to go and try to convince the U.S. government to create an international fund for peace. And the idea was not just give a few $1 million a year, let's make a serious investment. Let's have $100 million a year. Let's do even more than that. And recently you are having finally a breakthrough in getting both Republicans and Democrats to finally listen. I remember how hard it was in the beginning. We'd go from embassy to an embassy, from a senator to a senator, just trying to get them to even meet with us. And watching that really progress and succeed is just fascinating. Can you tell us a bit about the progress?
Yes, and you know how hard it is. If I can bring Aziz to a meeting and we don't get it done that day, you know that it's a tough challenge you've undertaken. You know, this is one of the nice things about working with a group of Israelis and Palestinians who do peace building is, you know, you're working with a group of people who are just going to be relentless at picking at the problem until you get it done, because these are people who, unfortunately, despite best efforts, have not been able to solve this problem, and they just keep coming back day after day to keep working on it. And so we first proposed this international fund actually in 2004. We launched it as a public initiative in 2009, and that same year we actually had a bill introduced in Congress, and it didn't pass. And so we reintroduced it, and we reintroduced it. Each new Congress we came back, and in the last 2 to 4 years really started to get some traction. And in this Congress, we built a coalition that is incredibly diverse, of Jewish and Christian and Arab groups and NGOs and Republicans and Democrats, everybody on the scene supporting this effort, even in the Jewish community, which can be quite diverse in views about this issue. Everyone from J Street to AIPAC, the AJC, and we got Republicans and Democrats in both the House and the Senate to introduce and push legislation. And in the House, our leads were Nita Lowey, who's the chairwoman of the Appropriations Committee, and Congressman Fortenberry, and we actually got it passed in the House. The bill passed in the House and is teed up in the Senate, also with strong leadership, Senators Kaine and Coons and Graham. And now we're in this interesting period where the US government is figuring out how they're going to fund the next year of government operations. And a lot of this comes down to inside Washington stuff and pandemic and politics and elections. There's a lot going on. And so we're now working to try to make sure that the bill that got passed the House is going to get included in the funding that eventually emerges for fiscal year 21 for the US government. We'll see. There are a lot of forces much bigger than ours, unfortunately, at play, but we have never reached this level of progress. And it's really a testament to how you can you keep coming at it and you keep pushing for it, and eventually you can get there. And, you know, our inspiration for this was the International Fund for Ireland, which brought more than $1.5 billion to that conflict and continues to make sure that the grassroots is supportive of a long-term peace. And so we know it works, and we are going to keep on doing everything we can to bring it to the Middle East so that the next generation can have a different future.
Huda, so you are joining us from the suburbs of Hebron in Palestine, and you work for OMIP in the field right there. Can you tell us about the peace movement there? It's a peace movement, I know, being part of it, that has faced a lot of challenges, has faced a lot of funding is definitely a major issue. It's one of the things that is hard to do in the nonprofit sector as a whole, but especially in the peace movement nonprofit world, very few individuals want to fund you. Sometimes governments for it, sometimes against it. So to give us a little bit understanding, who are these peace organizations? What are they doing today over there?
Thank you, Aziz. It's an honor to be with you guys here tonight, speaking to you from Hebron about peace and peace movement. And one of the things I do believe in as a peace activist is that we need to redefine peace based on the context we are living in. Our community, the peace building community in Israel and Palestine and in Israel, has been hit by all kinds of challenges. One thing that I've gained during my work with these organizations is that they are very resilient. And that resiliency is actually very much connected to the Palestinian narrative. And this is why I am so proud of the peace building community in Palestine. Our community has faced a number of challenges, but none of them is as intense as this time. You can look at the geopolitics of the region, and you can see that even the deal with the EU, with the Arab Emirates, Arab United Emirates, or Bahrain, is actually affecting our work on daily basis, because the hashtag normalization, anti-normalization, is being also putting its shadow on the work that we're doing. But for this movement to move forward and to be noticeable, to be visible, there are certain things that needed to be done since 2014, since I became the regional director of the Alliance for Middle East Peace. And one of them is to stop doing the dialogue as a contact theory, the dialogue for the sake of dialogue, the dialogue that is based on imbalance between the occupied and the occupier, the dialogue that is based on benefits that come from the occupier with pyramids. This is the carrot for many Palestinian peace activists. This has changed. The culture that has to do with peace being an interest of the Israelis only, and the Palestinians are just, they come along, has changed. And we are talking also about an environment that is totally different after Rabin's assassination, which is something that I think is being underplayed in the entire region. Rabin's assassination has affected the peace building community immensely. And on the political level of Israel, we are living with or dealing with a different Israel from 1995. It's totally different. I have to say it's also very, very honest. It's an honest Israel. We're dealing with an Israel that is not shying away from saying the interest of the existence on the land. The fact that an Orthodox right-winger killed a hero, quote unquote, in the middle of Tel Aviv, and for that stream of politics to continue to rule Israel until today, and its impact on how the Palestinians and the Israelis who are involved in the peace building community are also identifying themselves. We actually got to a point now in Palestine and in Israel where we define the peace building community as a co-resistant work, with cautiousness using the word resistant, because sometimes it has the images of suicide bombing, buses being blown up in the middle of Tel Aviv. But when we talk about social justice resistance, when we talk about freedom of speech resistance, when we talk about rights resistance, equal rights resistance, this is what I feel that the peace community, the peace building community in Israel and Palestine is finding itself now in this space, that we are united together to fight all kinds of injustices without shying away from the fact that this work actually works. To me, when the political systems in the entire world failed to protect people during COVID-19 as a pandemic, and the civil society in Israel and Palestine comes together in order to respond to immediate needs emerging from the fields, that is a testament for how resilient, how important the work of the civil society, including the peace building community. So I am seeing this movement growing, getting more sophisticated, more courageous in a sense that they want to be there out in the front lines, not being afraid of being punished for the work that they are doing. We have people in prison because of their activities. We have people who have been outcasted because of their work, and still they come forward and they speak about their belief in peace as the only tactic, the only strategy that would allow both people to reclaim their rights on an equal footing in this land. And I would say that women are, because I work with many women from this community, are the most courageous among them, among the entire community. And no offense to men, but we understand that they are partners. We understand the limitations they have. But women, especially the women who paid the highest price for this conflict, they lost their loved ones. They are taking the front lines now, speaking about things that are still being covered up with the peace work. They are talking about real issues between Israelis and Palestinians. They are talking about narratives. They are talking about loss and reconciliation. They are talking about reconciliation with one community rather than, running after the other. They are talking about celebrating the lives of those who are the fallen ones in a way that that does not take away from their sacrifice. I'll stop here. I'll give you time for questions.
No, I think everything you're saying is fascinating, and I'm glad that you're here with us so that we can discuss the issue of women. Do you see that there is a shift into more women leadership in this movement?
Absolutely, and it's not just connected to the fact that the culture after Oslo has changed, and we are dealing with a different Israel, and we are dealing with a different Palestine. I think it's also the entire conflict transformation movement all over the world, where women were in the forefront of it. And we're learning from models like the Liberian model, where women between 2003 and 2007 took down one of the worst warlords. And instead of just engaging in some sort of competition over who is going to run the country, they actually opened their homes to the children who have been recruited to be soldiers. Women transcended over their pain and their loss, and they were mostly the ones who paid the price for it. And now they are leading Liberia to a different level of governing. Rwanda, Sarajevo, the Bosnians and the Herzegovinians, and what happened there. If it wasn't for the women who came forward and spoke about rape, massive rape that happened in 1995, we would not have 1325. We wouldn't have 1325, but also we would not have had the UN resolution that considers raping women during conflict as a war crime. It's all because of these women finding the power that from within, that comes from the identity of them being women. And in that sense, I also don't believe that it's something that's strict to the Middle East, and women in the Middle East are the most, to be in need for empowerment. I don't even use the word empowerment when I work with women, because I see that they are powerful, and they bring that power once they are together in one room, and once they put their eye on the goal, which is not competition but cooperation for a better life, not only for them but for the entire society. And this is where I feel that the energy of women is coming together, and this is also thanks to the global movement of liberating women from all kinds of stereotypes against them. And I would say that women in Palestine and Israel are very interested in the Me Too movement in the United States. We have been in touch with leaders from that movement. Some women went and participated in the rallies at the beginning of the Trump administration time. So we are learning, and I think this is what makes women a little bit different. They don't have that egocentric proposition when it comes to peace. Peace is for everyone, and peace is the right, the inherited right for every child in the world, for every person in the world. And the tent is open always for everyone who believes in that. So there is no hierarchy, no ego.
Right.
Same with dealing with a crisis, like we're seeing through COVID.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Avi, I was thinking about where I know you're working a lot on the financial aspect of supporting these organizations, but where do you see the role of the United States and of Europe, where you're also working, in affecting this conflict? We see the US, especially in the last couple of years, have become very active in making changes on the ground, let's say, moving the embassy. It's been always involved in negotiations between Israelis and Palestinians. Europe have traditionally been active. What's really the role of outsiders? Is it going to be pressure from the outside that would make a difference there? Is this something we should pursue? Or is it something that really only Israelis and Palestinians, the groups there, that need to get together and just figure it out?
I think it's a great question. And
just before you start, I'll just say that we're live on Facebook. Just mention that and say hello to everyone on Facebook, and thank you for joining us. Sorry for the delay. Go ahead.
Hi to everyone on Facebook. I think it's a great question. And we actually have the benefit now of the 30 years of the Oslo process, if we can tie it all together under that name, to understand what was missing there. So we had various times where the United States and the international community tried to encourage, support, bribe, twist arms, all kinds of different approaches that tried to impose solutions to one extent or another. Sometimes more lightly, where it was really about trying to facilitate conversations, and sometimes more strongly, where the international community put out parameters for what they thought the solution would look like. And ultimately, again, it never got to the finish line, because at the end of the day, all it takes is a small group of people who are determined to torpedo that kind of thing. And if you have not helped the majority of Israelis and Palestinians who support it, if you haven't strengthened them, if you have not connected them, if you have not made them a formidable movement in support, then it's just too easy for the rejectionists to come in and destroy it with violence and hatred and everything that we've seen. So, you know, there's of course a role to play for the international community to try to put diplomacy and negotiations and things on the table to try to get people in the room. But what we saw actually, especially in the last 10 years, is that when the international community did that, they spent most of their time and energy just trying to get people to sit at the table and negotiate the size of the table and where everyone's going to sit around the table. They were so busy with all of that that they never actually got to talking about the issues, much less negotiating anything. And from our perspective at ALMEP, and we've said this to every incoming and outgoing administration, you would be far better served to spend a lot of that energy on building the environment from the grassroots up, so that the environment was more conducive to the peace you're trying to make. Because let's be honest, almost no political leader is going to go out there and strike a deal when they think that no one's standing behind them. And certainly no political leader who does that is going to last very long. And unfortunately, I think that's the lesson of Oslo from the earliest of days, is how difficult it was to honor and continue with the agreements, even once you had gotten to that point that was so difficult of reaching, to have them signed. And so, that's what we say the role of the international community is. And frankly, I'll say the diaspora communities as well. I believe very strongly that there's no such thing as just sitting on the sidelines. You're either contributing to the problem or you're contributing to the solution. If you're a part of a diaspora community, someone is speaking in your voice and they're speaking for something. And so you really have to make sure that your voice is being represented in support of the people on the ground who are doing the real hard work. And that's one of the things we've been able to build through ALMEP, is a vehicle for people around the world, whether you're in government or you're just a normal person, a vehicle for people to connect with and support the very courageous peace builders on the ground who are doing the really hard work. And if we can bring support to them, if we can bring visibility to them, if we can bring resources to them, we can move the needle over a long-term period of time.
And this is really an important point you're making, because one thing that to me has been frustrating when it comes to diasporas is we have wealthy diasporas of both communities, Jewish and Palestinian communities. Yet when it comes to supporting peace work, both of these communities don't really engage much with what Huda, you are doing, what we are doing on the ground over there. If anything, you see the opposite. I just saw yesterday a documentary about how much of the settlement activities is not coming even from the Israeli government, it's coming from the diaspora, where people kind of feel guilty, they're not there, and so they feel I have to support, and they seem to often go toward the hawkish, not toward the peace groups. And I remember reaching out when I first got to the States to some of those people, and the ones who were supportive of what we did, they said, oh, but we don't feel comfortable giving money to peace organizations. How do we change that? How do we get people in the diaspora? Because it's not only the governments really that should be helping. Like you said, it's everybody on the line. And we do have communities who are influential, who are political, who are wealthy, and yet neither of them are really as engaged as we need them to be.
Aziz, I think two things come into my mind. One is from the day I started talking to organizations about trying to put them together in a coalition and build real cooperation among the groups, until now, I am always amazed when we bring their stories to a new audience of people who are following the conflict, people who've spent their lives following the conflict because they're part of the diaspora, who think, people on Capitol Hill whose job it is to follow the conflict, and they think they know everything about it. And then you sit them down with someone like Aziz or Huda, who tells their personal stories and then tells the story about how they're actually one of tens of thousands of people doing this. And it blows people's minds open because they had no idea this work is taking place. And that's, ALMEP, we spent many years organizing among the groups and building their strength. We spent many years bringing more resources. And one of the things we're going to continue to do more and more of is going to be bringing the spotlight to shine it on them so that more people learn about it. Because I have found that that when people find out about it, it amazes them, and it's not very hard. If you bring someone like Huda into the room, it's not very hard to get some new supporters. And the other thing I will say is, from an institutional perspective, I think it's changed a lot over the last 10 or 15 years.
Yeah.
At one time, maybe there were people who were reluctant to step in and raise their hand in support. But I think what has changed is, and I can say this especially about the Jewish community, which I know well, there's a lot more willingness now. And part of it is because the conflict has become so dark in so many ways. There's a lot more willingness now for people to step in and support these kind of projects, even as a community, as an institution, as a federation, whatever kind of organization you're talking about, because they see that just repeating the old mantras and slogans is not sufficient. And we really need to be attacking it from the grassroots. And there's so many people of goodwill that we can support on the ground and feel good about it. So that has changed. And so the more eyes that we can open, I think we're going to find a lot more supporters.
So speaking about supporters, we have a question from one of our listeners about the specific organizations that one can participate in or with in the US. Is that something that can be found on your website, or is that something you'd like to just mention now?
Yeah,
Okay.
of course, they can go to our website. We have more than 125 organizations that are doing all kinds of theories of change, but they are actually on the ground. And they do education to humanitarian aid, to dialogue, to reconciliation work. And I would point here also to our COVID-19 impact report that Olmec put together, which is an amazing document with numbers and with names of organizations that came together and responded to COVID-19 crisis. Olmec.org is full of all kinds of information, but also on if there is a specific question about any organization, which is something that we do all the time, we work as consultants when it comes to our organizations. We're happy to give more about this organization. We do this also with donor community all the time when they get in touch with us to consult on which organization would be best for their regulations, and we're happy to serve that. And I would say also that we are trusted by our community to provide these information all the time. But please check our website and check that report because it's really important.
Hey,
we just sent the website. We just sent the website on the chat so everyone can see. Go ahead, Avi.
Thank you. I was just going to suggest invite Huda. Really, if we jumped right into peace building and peacemaking and organizations and stuff, but we didn't really give people a very clear taste of some of the kinds of activities that our members are doing. Maybe I'm not supposed to be asking questions here, but
no, that was my next question. Go ahead.
Okay, maybe Huda, would you? I'm happy to, but Huda's the best one to give some examples of what our members actually do on the ground.
Happy to do that, and I think it's relevant to COVID-19 pandemic. So one of our members organization called Project Rosanna provided 20 ventilators donated to the Palestinian ICUs all over the West Bank. And they've done that during the time that the Israelis and Palestinians are not talking together as governments. And they actually did the diplomatic work between the two entities. And I followed some of their work in Dura.
How many ventilators as a whole exist in the West Bank? We're talking about under 200, am I right?
Yes, but this was specific also for the COVID-19 hospital in Dura, which is focused only on critical conditions with COVID-19. And we had more than 17,000 people subscribing to Standing Together website, which is an organization that is inside Israel, that is doing direct action on a daily basis almost. Standing Together is one of the organizations that goes to the marginalized communities in Israel, and they do community work there. We have more than 200,000 people attended the Memorial Day, in which two of our organizations partner every year to celebrate the lives of those who lost their lives actually for the conflict. And this is unprecedented. And in that event, Mr. Mladinov, the UN envoy for peace in the Middle East, spoke to the bereaved families and the ex-soldiers and prisoners. And that was broadcasted all over the world at the same time. We have more than 120 students who, or alumni who were part of other organizations who got together and did all kinds of alumni work on leadership, youth leadership. We are now putting together a one-of-kind poll on attitudes of youth, both in Palestine and in Israel. We partnered with the Shikaki polling center to do that. And it's going to be a little bit different from any other polling because it's only focused on youth attitudes toward peace and peace building in Israel and Palestine, which is something that we need to inform ourselves about other programs that we are doing. We have Tahrir Movement, which is an organization that is dedicated only to working within Palestine, that partnered with other organizations to provide food parcels during Ramadan for the marginalized communities that was affected economically speaking by COVID-19. We have Kids for Peace who who got volunteers from their organizations to go and work with the elderly, the most vulnerable in Jerusalem, to help them during COVID-19. I can go on and on. It's just the amount of work that we are doing together. Even in, having organizations collapsing into each other or merging as one unity and learning from that experience. All kinds of strategic rethinking, rethinking our theories of change, responding to the immediate needs when it comes to the political changes around us. During annexation, we had all kinds of activities, even when there was a lockdown, demonstrations all over the place, Israelis and Palestinians together. We're putting together also with a partnership with Rabbis for Human Rights to help in olive picking season in the north and south of the West Bank, Israelis and Palestinians coming together against all the odds. When the peace space is actually shrinking, even because of COVID and permits, people are finding ways in order to interact. The amount of consultations I do on a daily basis between these organizations to do programs together is the reason why I keep doing this work, because that's where hope lies.
And I'll just say, for those who are listening to us, you can go back to some of our earlier episodes, and some of these organizations we have hosted. Combatants for Peace, which I serve now as a board member on, we had Sulaiman Al-Khatib, their Palestinian director, in one of our episodes. Parent Circle, which I also been a member of for a very long time. We had two people from that organization speak. Hands of Peace, which is working with youth. We had them in one of our earlier episodes, A Creativity for Peace, and I'm sure I'm probably forgetting some people, Kim, and I'll get in trouble for it. But we've been talking to these people, and you can go back and listen to some of these episodes, all doing incredible work. And there are many, like you mentioned, that we haven't yet got a chance to interview. I'm sure we will slowly get through. The list is long, and the longer the list gets, the better it is. And maybe it's time to also tell people, if you have a question, this is a good time to send us your questions so we can ask Avi and Huda. Kim, you got something?
Yeah, I just got texted a message with a question about knowing that the governments are not pushing towards peace. How can these organizations, and especially ALMEP, push the governments or affect or impact the governments to act otherwise?
Do you want to take that?
I can.
Okay. Okay, go for it.
And then turn it to you, Huda. Look, one of the things that ALMEP does and has done very successfully is to create leverage. When you're trying to change something as big as this conflict, we need to figure out how to apply as many drops of impact as we can and turn it into a flood of positive change. And one way we do that is by trying to institutionalize and systematize, change the systems so that they're working in the right direction towards peace. And that includes some of the things Huda mentioned. We have ways that we're bringing together the organizations so that every one of them can be more effective and impactful individually, and also that they can work together. we've got this alumni leadership forum where we're helping the organizations build alumni networks effectively, so that when someone goes through their program, let's take a kid who goes to a hand-in-hand school, for example, and then graduates high school. That person has had a huge impact on their attitudes and the way they see the world. We need to continue to engage them throughout their lives. And there was a report in the last couple of years that was done that actually showed that these programs, when done right, can affect people's attitudes and also their actions for many, many years to come over the long term. And we need to continue to multiply that. And so we're bringing the organizations together so that when one does something effectively, they can share that with everyone. We're working on building a cohort of organizations that will be able to grow and scale quickly and absorb some of the major resources that we hope will be coming to bear soon. So that kind of effort to change the system and institutionalize it, you know, the idea of the International Fund was that there would be diplomats who would wake up every morning and worry about whether they were going to have negotiations that day. But there was no one with the backing of the international community who would wake up every day and say, hey, how am I going to create a better environment for peace? How am I going to build peace at the grassroots level? And the idea of the International Fund is to create that institution so that someone does have that job, and they have that job with a really big budget so they can make change every day for years to come. So those kind of institutional things are things that we can push for. And, you know, to this question and the one prior about what can you do if you're in the United States, for example, go to our website, get connected with our communications, sign up for our newsletter, connect with us on social media, and you'll get a couple things out of that. One, you will learn about the organizations on the ground, and you may find one that really inspires you and you want to connect with them directly and become a supporter and a friend of their work. And another is you will hear about ways that you can support what we're doing in Washington, for example, or what we're doing in London or Paris in order to promote sensible ways for the international community to grow this work. Because one day there will be a peace agreement and it will solve the conflict and it will stick. But that's only going to happen when we've built the foundation for it to sit upon. And that's what we're doing now. And we're going to have to do it for a good number of years. So we can encourage the governments to push toward that while we're waiting for the environment to develop in the right direction.
Amen to that. But Huda, just before you answer, because it's a follow-up question and I'm sure you'll be able to help with this, I know that a lot of these organizations are taking in the participants voluntarily, and I'm sure that the funds will be pushing towards connecting more youth and more adults. But as we know, this area is not very stable. It's enough sometimes that, you know, one thing is to happen, breakout, war, COVID, whatever, to change someone's mind. How do you deal with something like that? I mean, it's constantly changing. So you're affecting someone and then the reality is affecting them towards another route.
That's why we are investing in sustainable peace building funding, which is hopefully the advocacy would pay off in the United States and Europe for it, but also in the Arab world at some point. And one thing that we made sure that it's happening for our community here is that OLMEP, through her advocacy, created a space for our community to be present every time we have delegations coming from the world, from all over the world coming to Jerusalem. So we had meetings with Congress women and men. We had meetings with European ambassadors. We do a lot of debriefing with these organizations, not only on the funding aspect that comes with a lot of strings and reporting mechanism, but also on opening up to different kinds of theories of change, that you will not make peace when you have 20 Palestinians and 20 Israelis in the room and you keep doing the same thing. You need to continue, you need to respond to the needs of these communities. And one of the things that we have been working on is developing this concept of social entrepreneurship, which is many of the graduates of these programs need to go back to their own communities, regain some sense of legitimacy, get engaged with their communities, and doing some social entrepreneurship rather than just being focused on the impasse that we are in. But this is not only on the local level. We work closely also with the prospective governments, both in Israel and Palestine. Each arm of OLMEP offices does that kind of work. Now, in terms of crises hitting, one of the things that hit us lately is the permits issue, and the lockdown, and the fact that if Israelis come to see areas, they would have to put themselves in 14 days quarantine. And we had some Israeli activists asking the question, so why settlers are not doing the same thing? So they cross the borders on a daily basis, but they are not doing this. And we've managed to find ways in order to meet virtually. Not only that, go to donors with proposals that are taking more than one organization together, focused on alumni and social entrepreneurship. And I think this is an answer to the instability when it comes to politics and economics of this place, but also responding immediately to needs emerging from these societies, and also gaining a lot of legitimacy within one prospective society community. That doesn't mean that the co-work is not important. It's really important, and it's finding different ways in order to be visible. And in that sense, we see a lot of cooperation on both sides when it comes to changing how we respond to these challenges, including the anti-normalization movement and BDS and diaspora narratives and refugees and Jerusalem, all of that.
And these organizations have a track record of success in adapting to very challenging moments. We've been through the second intifada. We've been through the ups and downs of the peace process when it seemed like it was going somewhere, and then when it wasn't. We've been through 2 or 3 wars between Israel and Gaza and Lebanon. We've been through all kinds of things. Now we've been through COVID, and every time the organizations need to adapt, and they have. And it's in that sense, it's a very healthy ecosystem, because they innovate and they figure out ways how to bring people together and move the needle no matter what comes, which is part of what gives me hope about this, because I've seen them make it happen under all kinds of circumstances.
Oh, I remember in the second intifada being with somebody like Ramil Hanan and his motorbike going to Bethlehem, when he and I would have gone to jail for me taking him to Bethlehem, and him being willing to even go in the hardest of times, talk at a high school there and be able to have a peace conversation. So you're absolutely right. These are people who have not just done things that are hard, put themselves in harm in some ways, harms, and risk their lives sometimes to do this kind of work. And sometimes when people talk about peace work, sometimes it sounds like, oh, peace work, so cute, so cool, but knowing these individuals and that we are talking about, many of whom are and were always willing to put their lives in danger to be able to achieve this work. And I think that's important to remember. And we got 2 more questions before we finish.
Very short answers.
Yes. We'll start with a probably shorter answer. Is the USIP, U.S. Institute for Peace, is interested at all in your work? Are they supporting your initiative? Karen asked.
Yes.
Great partners of ours.
All right. That was a very quick answer. Kim?
And the second, are there leaders and volunteers working among the Bedouin community?
Yes, we have one organization, one of many organizations that works with the marginalized Bedouin communities inside Israel. Ajik is one of them, and the Hadaleen organization is another that also did a lot of actions around the Khan al-Ahmar crisis and made it visible to the entire world. And we have we have organizations that work closely with Knesset members who are interested in this work. Again, our website is full of these information for those who want to know more.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, we'll just say thank you to both of you for joining us. This was an amazing discussion. So thank you very much, and continue the great work that you're doing.
And I want to say that it's important for people in diaspora to give some credit to the people who are living here, and knowing very well that the polarization over Israel and Palestine is not helping here. And no matter what you feel or how you feel about Israel and Palestine, there are real people living here who are paying the consequences of that conflict, and we need to be there for them. Thank you.
And I want to say thank you for the opportunity. Thank you to Huda, and especially thank you to Mejdi, not only for this, but for all that you're doing to highlight these programs, both on the web and in better times in person, when you take tours there and show people. There's nothing, seeing is believing. There's nothing like it. So thank you for all of your work.
Oh, hey.
Bye.
And ask you the last question we just got, just because I'd like to hear the answer myself. It's asking, do you have some strong voices in the diaspora who are influential in supporting your work? If you can tell us some of who might be, if there are some who are supporting your work here in the States or in Europe. I think we just mentioned USIP is one. Are there other names that come to mind of organizations or individuals?
Sure. I mean, the coalition we've put together for the International Fund, for example, we've got the AJC, we've got Churches for Middle East Peace, the Israel Action Network, the Israel Policy Forum, Jewish Federations of North America, J Street, Americans for Peace Now, the New Israel Fund. And then we've got all of the actual political leaders, the Democrats and Republicans in the House and the Senate. So it's really quite a broad coalition, and wherever we go, we try to connect with the local communities and tell these stories and get their support. So we're very blessed to have those kinds of supporters. And
Huda, one more question for you. Who's this?
She's one of my 34 nieces and nephews that I'm doing this work for. Dunya.
Me, I got only like 20, 21, 22. I can't count anymore. So you win.
You know your peeps, Aziz. We believe in reproduction.
Yeah, none. So sisters are doing the work for me. So, well, thank you both so much. This always great to talk to both of you. Both are dear friends and partners and people who we admire so much. And next week, we continuing kind of into another part, let's say, of this conversation. If you've been following the news, Kim, you were telling us earlier, this is affecting your neighborhood. There's a lot.
Yeah, you can see the cop in the middle in the picture. Yeah. That's where I live. That's my street. So the protests are right outside. Yeah, we're going to be talking about the protests in Israel, why people are going out and protesting while they're under closure, complete lockdown, some would say, and people are still out in the streets protesting. So join us.
And always we say it's not where you travel, but it's how.
How.
The next week.
Bye-bye. Thank you.